Well, welcome to On the Same Page. I'm Tommy Sanders, and welcome to the Arkansas Sports Hall of Fame. Our thanks to them for lending their premises for today's show. Today's book, definitely a sports story and definitely with an Arkansas connection. In July of 2007, just down the street at Dickey Stevens Park, the Arkansas Travelers Baseball Club were playing the Tulsa Drillers. Mike Coolbaugh was the first base coach, and he was struck by a batted ball from the bat of Tulsa driller Tino Sanchez. Mike Coolbaugh fell instantly dead, a great tragedy that took minor leaguer Mike Coolbaugh's name from the fine print in a few newspapers to the front page of newspapers all around the country. So important was this incident that Sports Illustrated sent down writer Scott Price to do a two-page story. When Scott Price arrived here in Little Rock, other stops in the AA circuit, he realized very quickly that this was more than a two-page story. The book that resulted, Heart of the Game, is our book today on the Same Page. Join us. We'll talk to Scott Price. I'd like you to meet Scott Price. You may know him as S.L. Price from his work on Sports Illustrated, where he's been a senior writer since 1994. 10 years with newspapers before that, the author of two other books besides Heart of the Game, a book called Pitching Around Fidel, and another book called Far Afield, a sports writing odyssey. Scott, thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thanks for having me today.
When did you first hear of the Mike Coolbaugh incident, and how were you affected by it?
Well, the first time I heard of it was like everybody else. Day or so after, heard about it, and I will say that I think, like everybody, I was shocked and had that sort of instantaneous, oh my God, that's so bizarre, that's so strange. I was in the midst of doing another story, and I read about it, and then I sort of moved on. And then about a week later, an editor of mine at Sports Illustrated called me and said, would you be interested in maybe doing something on this? And we're envisioning maybe a 2 or 3 page story. And I said, sure, yeah, I'll go down. I mean, I love minor league baseball. I've always been interested in it. I worked for a minor league team in 1980 for a summer, and I just loved the minor league scene. And I came down to Frisco, Texas, found out that that's when Tino Sanchez would be returning to the team. And
this is how long after the accident?
The accident was July 22nd. This was August 8th.
Okay.
So 3 weeks later, Tino was down in Yauco, Puerto Rico, and just to give some background, I felt like the story had been covered so much and so well, but Tino hadn't spoken yet, and nobody really. And I thought, well, if we're going to do a story, we have to take it a little bit further and try and get Tino, and that was sort of my caveat to the editors. I felt, I don't know if it's worth it to do what everybody's already done. Let's try and if we're going to do it, I think it's worth it if we get Tino. Well, I went down to Frisco, Texas. This was Tino's first game back, and he did not know that Scott Coolbaugh, Mike's brother, was coaching the Frisco team. And in the first inning, he looks up, and there's Scott Coolbaugh walking up the first baseline. Tino's in the dugout, and he looks up, and there's a man at first base with the word Coolbaugh on his back. And I knew that, and of course I'm watching this, and then in the 8th inning, Tino was sent out to substitute at first base, and to play the field at first base, and I knew that the two hadn't spoken, and the two of them, I'm suddenly realizing, are standing side by side, 3 feet away from each other, and I just felt like I'd never seen a more emotionally packed moment in my life. And the hair, I mean, I'm talking about it now, the hair in my arms go up just remembering it.
How did those guys feel? Did
well,
they want to talk to each other? Did they not want to talk?
Well, exactly. I mean, actually, Tino was obviously felt guilt-ridden, had gone to Yauco, had been crying night after night. He took the guilt.
Yauco is his home in Puerto Rico.
Sorry, his home in Puerto Rico. Took it upon himself, the guilt. He did not, he knew intellectually it was a freak accident. Knew it could happen to anybody. But the fact is that he couldn't help but feel guilty. He didn't sleep, and he kept it basically to himself, and didn't talk to his family about it. Nothing. Everybody sort of left him alone.
Had not talked to the Coolbaughs at this point.
Had not talked to the Coolbaughs, and the Coolbaughs, meanwhile, of course, are they're not blaming him either intellectually, but it's very difficult for them because even though they know it's not his fault, it's difficult to see this person and meet with him. And they, at the same time, felt we want to push past this and somehow reach out to Tino. And so I know this a little bit, but when I saw that scene at the ballpark, I realized that this was a much deeper story. And at the end of that game, I was walking down to the clubhouse. Lights had just gone out in the stadium, and I saw Tino standing there talking to two women. And I found out later that those two women were Mike's sister Lisa and Scott's wife. And that was the first time they had met. And I later spoke to Tino and the principals involved. But the point is that I'm realizing as the moments go by that it's an incredible story.
It certainly turned out to be longer than a two-page story.
That's what I mean.
Sports Illustrated.
So I called
Did you know then it was also going to be a book?
Well, here's the thing. I then called Sports Illustrated and said, look, this is a much deeper story. I need to have time to, and they said, great, go ahead and do it. I did the story, and Tino spoke to me, and I ended up being the first person he spoke to. I think I just happened to be there at the time, and he was ready. And so as a result, yeah, everybody spoke to me, and after the story came out, I got an incredible response. And it was the first time in my 15 years at Sports Illustrated that I knew here was a story that I had not really done justice to. I mean, I did the best I could in the space, but there was a paragraph devoted to, for example, the people in the ballpark that night. Sure. And people like Bill Valentine, people like Bo McLaughlin, and I just thought there's just too much here. This is a real chance to tell a story about minor league baseball.
So the book was basically born at that time. The big job digging deeper into the lives of Mike Coolbaugh and Tino Sanchez, their lives and their careers. Not the easiest call when you have to talk to relatives who've been through all this trauma. I mean, how you imagine that as being terribly difficult, trying to get these people to open up to you and not hurting their feelings and not torturing them.
Well, it takes an incredible amount of forbearance and patience on the part of them. They had, luckily for me, I had written the story about Mike, and the way I had ended the story, and I meant it, was, Mike was not an exciting player. He was not a personality. He was a down at the bone minor league lifer, and there weren't many stories written about Mike Coolbaugh, even though he played 17 years. He was your basic guy, but what suddenly made him interesting and what made people pay attention to a very good man's life was the tragedy and strangeness of his death. And so that's how I ended the story, was that I was saying, here's a good man who finally the world has paid attention to because of this strange event. And I think that because of that, the family understood, my approach to this book. I certainly, in all my reporting, could find nothing bad to say about Mike Coolbaugh or Tino Sanchez or anybody else. And in fact, like I said, the families and Tino and everybody went so above and beyond the call of duty in responding not just to the initial interviews, but then I had to go back to them and I had to nail down details of very difficult moments. And in some ways it was harder for me, though, I think, than it was for them, in the sense that people want to talk about these things.
They do want to.
Well, in the sense of, when a loved one dies, I think that people want to tell why he was loved and what it was about them. And there is the pain of recounting certain events, but there's also the balance of being able to tell why they were so admired in their lifetime.
Let's talk a little bit about the Coolbaugh family and Mike Coolbaugh and the way he came up. His dad, family originally from upstate New York.
Right.
Started a business down in San Antonio, fairly successful, and they were comfortable people, allowed the dad time to push and work these boys toward a baseball career. Right. How much of a really hard driving dad was
Well,
dad?
I mean, Bob Coolbaugh is sort of your classic tough dad. He wasn't, I don't think he got too physical with the kids, but he was very hard on them, and he put in a batting machine and in the backyard, and before Scott or Mike could do anything, he would say, well, do what you've got to do before you do what you want to do, and that meant going out taking 200, 300 swings a night. And then he would, haul in big logs,
stumps
basically, and basically have the kids chopping stumps because he'd heard of major leaguers doing it in the Northwoods of Canada. And Mike and Scott eventually were chipping the stump so quickly, and that Bob had to dull the blade, so that the stumps would last a little bit longer. Yeah. Real intense, but the kids loved it. They loved baseball, and it was a baseball family. The grandmother, Bob's mom, loved games, watched them, every night. So it really was a baseball family, and Bob did have the time, and it was it's extraordinary.
Motivator.
Life. Yeah,
a little
absolutely.
pressure on Scott. Was the older brother. Scott maybe got more pressure to be pure baseball than the younger brother, Mike. Scott had a good high school, college, and then went into the professional baseball.
He went to the University of Texas, played at their great storied program, and was purely, very quickly baseball was clearly his sport. Mm-hmm. There's something about being the firstborn son of a baseball nut that I think you're going to take a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Mike played a lot of different sports, and he actually was in some ways a better football player than baseball player. In fact, not so much. He was a better football player, and there were colleges that were interested in recruiting him. He was the best high school quarterback in San Antonio, and but then there was this freak accident where
one of the weirdest things I've ever heard of.
Where he was at halftime of a game, and his coach, the head coach of his team at Roosevelt High, basically went into a tirade and called Mike out for their play. They were losing at the time. Threw a clipboard, meant to throw it at the wall, and instead it struck Mike up here in the forehead and bridge of the nose, and he bled profusely, and suddenly all of a sudden the coach was fired because of it. This terrible.
The coach felt terrible.
Coach did feel terrible.
He did not mean
he apologized,
to hit him in the
but he was
face,
known for being this irascible,
volatile,
explosive Lombardi type, and as a result, the family believes the school sort of backed away, and
the recruiting schools. And why is that? Why would that be?
Their feeling was that because the coach was very plugged in, and they felt like why would the coach do that? Was Mike a bad actor in some way? Was the coach pushed to it? And so as a result, they just feel that they say the scholarship offers dried up, and then Mike began concentrating on baseball. And so again, the strange irony is that a freak accident got him really into baseball, and a freak accident is, of course, what ended his baseball career.
Goes into the minor leagues, gets a signing bonus to go in there, and to me, the bulk of the book, and to me, the most glorious part of the book is your examination of his life in the minors.
Yeah.
That's not a very easy subject to take on.
Right.
It's a lot, very intricate, the arcane rules of behavior and a chess game, really, to find a spot on the major league team. Did you handle it so well? You say you'd worked for a minor league club.
I did. We're talking, college internship type thing. But internship's wrong. I got paid with a hot dog and a can of Coke for running the press box or whatever for the Albuquerque Dukes. But the fact is that I had to go and sort of understand the code of baseball and what it is. And that's what I tried to get at with both Tino and Mike, which is, everybody sort of thinks, well, he was a minor league prospect. That's sort of what you say about almost everybody who's in the minor leagues, in the sort of general media.
But not everyone is a prospect.
Not everyone is a prospect. In fact, depending on the size of your bonus, depending on where you're drafted, there are a lot of variables, depending, of course, on who's ahead of you in the depth chart. Yeah. There are a lot of variables put on players and labels. And to a certain extent, how you play almost doesn't matter. Obviously, you can play your way through that if you're extraordinary, but it's very tough to get past those labels. And Mike had a label put on him. And
what was the label that was put on?
He was an organizational player. He was a guy who basically was. He was good enough to play, good enough to fill a spot, but nobody really had their eye on him as a future major leaguer.
And I could never pin down the rhyme or reason. He produced.
He did produce. But for example, Chris Weinke is the famous Heisman Trophy winner who
before he played football.
Before he played football, played baseball. Mike was drafted by the Blue Jays. So was Weinke, and basically Weinke got this massive bonus compared to Mike, and he was well publicized. People knew who he was. He was a fantastic high school talent in both football and baseball, And Mike found himself bumping behind Weinke the whole time, and that happened throughout his career, not just with Weinke. Once his
so
career,
all things being equal, the guy who's too big to fail will get the
exactly. I mean,
or too expensive to fail.
Our current economic situation.
Yeah, sort of like that. A
Exactly.
Little bit, yeah.
But I mean, it's a very strange world in that respect, and extremely frustrating to the players involved. I mean, Chris Burke told me, you look at baseball and people say love of the game. Well, players don't. There's a movie version of love of the game, and then there's the player version of love of the game.
And it's really not love.
It's a love-hate relationship. Yeah. You love it when you're on the field, and Scott Coolbaugh also spoke about this. When you're out there during the game, you understand exactly why you love this game. And then he said, and then you get off the field and you go back to being, ticked off all over again by the politics, by the things that stop movement. Now, having said that, I want to make this clear, and I try to make it clear in the book. Mike was in AAA for most of his career, and it was a minor league because he was a minor league talent. He had holes in his swing. He had certain things. Most people agree that he definitely didn't get his shot, but he was somebody who maybe would have been a good contributor off the bench, situational hitter, pinch hitter in the major leagues.
Very versatile.
Very versatile. Played first and third, but the heartbreak is for everybody is that he never got his opportunity, never got a chance to really show over time what he could do, and that is sort of what will sort of twist in the gut of the Coolbaugh family forever.
For a long time. I think my favorite aspect of the book is the way you weave through, especially through all the minor league stories, this the principle, the idea of respect for the game. Yep. It's kind of the ethos of pro baseball.
Absolutely.
Your best analogy is all the hot dogging and showboating that comes with an NBA player.
Right.
That workaday stuff for them, but if that happened in baseball, it would be a capital offense.
Yeah.
It's such a sort of, in many ways, a hidebound and very traditional conservative world.
Extremely. Baseball allows a couple, people to sort of, step outside it, and Mark Fidrich or
Sure.
There are certain people, and they like their characters, but overall, this idea of respect for the game is inherent in almost everything that is done in baseball and taught in the minor leagues, and taught is too gentle a word. Enforced throughout the minor.
Yeah.
I mean, one of Mike's teammates, when he did get called up briefly with the St. Louis Cardinals for 5 games, went up to him during the game. He was on the
playing center field,
and ran in. He was on the opposing team, but Mike was on second, and he ran in during the game just to say, "Hey, you made it. It's great, buddy." And when he got back to the dugout, his teammates said, "What?" And the cursing was you do not do this. And that's it's the same thing as showing up an opponent. It's the same thing as for example, a pitcher turning around and putting his hands up, saying, "How come you didn't field that ball?"
Right.
And then of course there's codes between the umpires and the players. You can face the pitcher and
say anything to
the umpire as long as you're not trying to incite the crowd. But if you look back, that's showing up
the umpire,
that's you calling him out in public.
So
there's all these minute. It's a minutely coded, testosterone-filled world.
It's like the double secret rules you have to learn in a fraternity or something like that.
And I will say, however, and one thing that intrigued me about the book, look, it's not just a story about Mike, a 17-year lifer. It's a story about Tino Sanchez, the man who hit the ball, was also an 11-year lifer, and he had to learn the code of the game. And part of what he had to learn was to love the game despite the kicks that the game gave him.
Yeah.
And I really believe that in many ways, it's the code of the game that taught Tino how to handle this situation. And
helped him grow up.
And helped him. If it had happened to Tino 8 years previous, he would have been a terrible person for this to happen to. And I'm not saying that he's a good. It was good for him to have. What I'm saying is he wouldn't have been able to handle it.
Right.
And not only that, I think he would have been flip and perhaps disrespectful, even unintentionally, to the Coolbaugh family by saying, "Well, that's baseball." But Tino went through what Mike had gone through, and through growing through the game, he felt a great anguish because he really identified with Mike. He knew Mike was what he was going to be 5 years down the line. And I feel like that anguish is truly a sign of respect that the code of the game taught him.
Yeah. That code of the game, part of Mike Coolbaugh's character, despite all these frustrations, despite losing this chess game in so many ways, he was a lifer. He was committed to ball. He was not happy outside of baseball,
right.
So happy to get back in. He gets the coaching job, and 3 weeks later this incident happens. The incident in your book takes up maybe 10 pages
Yeah.
of a 300-page book, but the setup is everything, and,
Right.
and you've set it up perfectly, these two characters, in this horrible place and time, and I agree with you when you say that it's great that there's no film of this horrible thing, and
Yeah.
that it's not internet fodder or anything like that. It's really, as I said, not a big part of the book, but it's what it all turns on.
Well, the thing is that what was interesting to me about the accident, aside from the obviously car crash element, which is that something bad happened, you can't take your eyes away from it, were the people in the ballpark that night. How many of them had some sort of incident or connection to, directly or indirectly, the damage a baseball can do? I mean, obviously, Bo McLaughlin, the pitching coach of the Tulsa Drillers, had his career ended by Harold Bain's drive up the middle on the pitcher's mound in the early 80s. John Asahina, who 3 months earlier had his skull fractured by a batted ball on the same Dickey Stevens Park field. Bill Valentine, who was the general manager, VP of the Travelers, had been behind the plate when Tony Conigliaro had been beamed. And it went on and on. Warren Stevens, the person who financed and gave the field, got the park built. His father had his baseball career ended by this. And there was look, Tino also hit Clint Hurdle in the face with a pop fly a few years previously. The Rockies manager. And Mike himself, a few months before, as he's getting ready for his last gig, hits his best friend in the head while they're doing pitching batting practice. So it's just this extraordinary amount, and it's very easy and understandable as a writer. I think, my gosh, all these strange things led to this moment. These people were here. But at the same time, my research told me, as I did the research, it becomes a little less spooky when you understand how often this happens in baseball. It is. Last week, Joe Martinez of the San Francisco Giants, had his face, 3 hairline fractures in his face from a batted ball. This kind of damage is really quite common, and it's scary.
Deaths to players is what's not common. This hadn't happened. A player had not died
Right.
in ball since. For 80 years.
Right.
Ray Chapman of the 80s.
Ray Chapman in 1920, of course, was
a pitched ball.
Was a pitched ball. Yeah. But no pro player, and still no pro player, has ever died from a batted ball. Amateur players have. And Mike, of course, was a coach. Yeah. There was a fan that was killed by a Manny Mota foul ball in 1970, I believe. So but it's extraordinary. To tell you the truth, with where pitchers end up. They're only about 45 feet away from the plate at the end of their delivery, and it really is extraordinary that it hasn't happened yet. Yeah, because there's a lot of accidents out there.
For someone to die instantly, as Mike Coolbaugh did, is so wildly improbable.
Right.
The ball had to hit it.
Yes.
This is not a cautionary tale. It's part. Why did this happen?
Right.
This beautiful family and everything like that. But the other aspect of it, lots of fans hurt through the years.
Yeah.
You go into the statistics
Yeah.
of injuries and death on the baseball field, semi-pro and pro baseball, and it's very scary.
Well, I'll tell you, even more so. The players and the coaches, look, their job is to stare at the baseball throughout the game. They're intently focused on it. What their the biggest fear is fans. A man, I have players telling me, look, and these are not players who sit around thinking about fans all day, but they've seen so many bad accidents involving fans in the stands who are not paying attention, who are eating popcorn, looking around. And look, it's understandable. They're 3.5 hours in a ballpark, but these are the people who are just looking around. And story after story told to me about fans who had been suffered serious damage from a foul ball. There aren't the screens set up like they are in Japan.
Right. And they go all the way down past the dugout.
Yeah. So as a result, you got to pay attention.
Mandy Coolbaugh, also a big character in the book and a very important character in the story. Baseball did not forget her and her young family. The Rockies organization was extraordinarily kind to them. Voting a series share.
Well, baseball players are known as being extremely stingy.
Yeah.
They're
a short period to make a lot of money.
Short period to make a lot of money, and there are stories are legion about players who maybe help a World Series team come on mid-season, help a World Series team win a World Series, and don't get voted a playoff share. For the Rockies to do what they did was an extraordinary act. Mike was only with the organization 3 weeks. He wasn't he didn't know many of the players. He knew one or two. But overall, you know, I honestly believe that, well, let me just step back. Everybody acted incredibly well in this situation. The fans raised a lot of money throughout baseball, especially throughout the Texas League. They were passing boots and hats and everything, and
in excess of $100,000.
Absolutely, yeah. And 170, I believe, was the total
really?
that teams claimed to have reported to have raised, and then of course over 230,000 the World Series share, or the World Series share. They lost the World Series. It could have been even higher. It could have been, I think, upwards of 300,000 if they had won. But everybody really just was very stand-up in a very quiet way. And that was also something that really attracted me about the book. Nobody was beating their chest and saying, hey, we did this for Mike or his family or anything like that. They didn't want to talk about it. The Rockies refused to talk about what they had done. They did not tell the press about it. It sort of leaked out a little bit, but no one wanted to take responsibility. And it goes
in a world
back,
of agents and unions.
Exactly.
I'm sure it was not the easiest thing in the world to get
It was not an easy thing to do, but they really went out of their way to do it. And I honestly believe that part of it was, of course, the tragedy is compelling, and the fact that Mandy had 2 children and another on the way touched everybody. But I think that it came down to the fact that the players and the fans, but especially the players, knew, look, we could have been Mike Coolbaugh. And if we couldn't have been him, they know, even the most talented knows, hey, they're just, Mike broke thumbs and wrists and everything that cut short his chances to get back to the major leagues. And they just knew that, you know, there were accidents that could have happened to me, and my career couldn't have been there. Yeah. And if they didn't think of it that way, they certainly knew somebody like Mike Coolbaugh. Yeah. And I think, to tell you the truth, we all know somebody like Mike Coolbaugh.
That's what motivated him. It's a great story, and you tell it so well. We have a little tradition on the show, Scott, that we have the author read a little bit of the book. Are you amenable to that?
I'm up for it.
I've
sure.
picked up a passage. You may have your own favorite passage.
No, I'll take it.
If you could start and finish this paragraph, starting with minor league baseball, it goes on to the next page. I really like that.
Okay. Minor league baseball also sells itself as a place where major league dreams are born, the place to see stars before they get too big and leave, and as a marketing play, it's the only one to make. You always want to flatter your audience, and it's never bad to reinforce the collective hope that, like those ball players scrambling around the field, we're all just punching our tickets here. We all can move up and out of this small town someday. We all have roots but are capable of leaving them behind. The truth wouldn't sell nearly as well, too scary, too depressing. The fact is, from the player's perspective, there's nothing casual or forgettable about any game in the minors. Every pitch and every play is, to at least one man there, loaded with significance. The pressure to perform is crushingly heavy, the financial cushion non-existent, the line between haves and have-nots vividly pronounced. Maybe 2 or 3 of the players you saw have a chance of playing in the major leagues. The rest, no matter how they perform, are learning, maybe even tonight, that this year or next year or the year after, they'll be going back to their own hometowns and humdrum jobs for good.
That's great. Heart of the Game is the name of the book. Scott Price, we want to thank especially the Arkansas Literary Festival for being at least partially responsible for Scott being here. Thank you so much. Best wishes on the book, which comes out in May. You may be seeing this after that time, but definitely worth checking it out. Thank you for joining us on the Same Page.